Wednesday show, and this guy's been so patient because he's regularly a Wednesday visitor. He is another one who is a refugee from KGO Radio. He is the sexy beast, the historian, the rabbi. How about it? John Rothmann, everyone. Yeah. Hey, John Rothmann, do you know, or should I have Albert tell us? So Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's got a couple of dollars, huh? She's got
it's from her family. She inherited a business. I think she and her brother run it together, and so she is very well fixed, and evidently needed some lip balm, and so she spent. It's
lip balm. Used.
Well, it's Kevin McCarthy, so it's got special lip balm. Yeah. So what's going to happen on this debt ceiling thing? Is the deal going to be made, or how do you handicap the whole thing, even just in terms of if the deal is made, the concessions that'll have to be made?
No one can afford not to make the deal, but I want to make the observation that the Republicans are in favor of cutting, but not on defense spending. And if I were countering, I would say, fine, let's have a spending cut and make it across the board that includes everything. But of course, that is not the way the Republicans think. And in the end, the debt ceiling will be raised because we cannot afford not to do it. And the implications for those people who aren't following it, not just the American economy, but the world economy. So I have every expectation the debt ceiling will be raised. But there's a little wiggle to this. Will it happen by June 1st? Well, if they wait a few days more, it won't hurt anything. But yes, there will be a debt ceiling raised. Can you imagine if Social Security checks and military pay didn't go out, what the reaction would be? I don't even want to think about it.
So the narrative, the political narrative, I would suggest it's been seized a bit by the GOP. You might disagree with me on that, but I would suggest because Biden has indicated he might negotiate on certain things, and Biden is an institutionalist. He's I can broker a deal kind of guy. He's a reach across the aisle kind of guy. Has that hurt politically in any way? Who is, on just the political X's and O's, hurt by this delay in raising the ceiling and the debt limit?
If the debt ceiling is raised, there will be a zero-sum gain, because the American people won't remember.
Okay.
That's your answer.
Okay. Isn't that interesting that it seized the narrative and seized the headlines right now, but you're saying there's just going to be so much other water over the bridge or under the bridge and over the dam that it won't matter. Okay.
Every day there's more news breaking, and one of the great advantages of listening to the Mark Thompson Show is to be able to explore all of those issues.
Oh, well, that's very nice. We should I think you should ding him, not applause, but ding for the look, the field is getting crowded on the GOP side for president. Ron DeSantis expected to join the field. I mentioned Tim Scott. Tim Scott's got money. Sadly, American politics is all about money. Yeah. And DeSantis is going to have, I was just reading this morning, he's going to have a lot of money being poured into trying to push him past Donald Trump. Right now, Trump outpaces him in polling, but there's a lot of money flowing into the DeSantis campaign from, again, mainstream GOPers who don't want Trump and feel that Trump's got a stink on him that will cost them the executive branch and perhaps down-ticket races as well. How do you see this all shaping up?
I have a political trivia question for you. What was the most expensive delegate ever elected to a Republican National Convention, and for what candidate?
Oh.
I'll tell you. I'm going to answer my own question. It was John Connally, who got one delegate out of South Carolina that cost $11 million. My answer is it's not money necessarily that will determine the outcome of the race. Donald Trump is clearly the favorite, but let me remind you, he faces indictments on several different levels. And there are a lot of people who are unhappy with him, including leaders of the Republican Party. Will it make a difference? I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you right now, it is as much the personality and the presentation, but there is one universal point. All of the Republican candidates agree on key things. They agree that a woman's right to choose should be restricted. Can you believe what happened in South Carolina?
I was just about to bring up South Carolina. Thank you. Go ahead.
They agree that there were election irregularities, which there were not. They agree with this so-called censorship that Ron DeSantis and others are promoting. And you mentioned the situation in Southern California with the play, which would omit the Nazis from The Sound of Music. It's crazy. But that also is a universal construct. So my sense is that the great problem the Republican Party has is they agree on a platform which is out of the mainstream of the American public. Donald Trump is another handicap. If Trump is the nominee, he carries with him all of that baggage. But it seems to me the Republicans are also saddled with policies. Remember, the last Republican National Convention did not adopt a platform. It simply said, whatever Donald Trump wants, we're for. And I don't think that's a winning combination. But we'll have to see how it sorts itself out.
That's interesting. Hang on a second. You don't think it's a winning combination for them because what?
The American people don't agree with them. The majority of the American people favor a woman's right to choose. The majority of the American people believe the election.
Well, those are policies, though. Those are policies,
yes.
though, John. And when you talk, I mean, I think he's a cult of personality, and the American people did. Now, again, we're talking about. Look, he just barely lost that election because of this ridiculous way that we do elections in this country.
No, he didn't just barely lose.
Yes, he did, John. He
got the same electoral vote that he'd gotten 4 years before in reverse with Hillary Clinton. And he called that a landslide.
Well, Hillary Clinton barely lost. It was. I'm talking about the Electoral College, the way it goes down, John.
He can't carry, in my judgment, key states, Georgia, Wisconsin. He's already demonstrated he can't carry those. Pennsylvania, which he thought he had a shot at, and he didn't. I have to tell you, I honestly believe it is a race the Democrats will have to lose in some way, because the Republicans can't win with Trump. And I have to tell you, people care about issues. I believe that. And it is clear that the majority of the American people do not agree with Donald Trump. Let me just point one other thing out to you. And that is that the big blow to Ron DeSantis was his statement about Ukraine not being in the national interest. And now he's having to reframe what he's doing. I have to tell you, the Republicans in my book, thank heaven, because of my policy views, are behind the eight ball, and I hope it remains that way.
Well, I clearly agree with you, and I think you're right. They diverge from what the American public wants, but there is, and you know this better than anyone because you're such a student of presidential history and governmental history, there is this cult of personality that ultimately can decide which way a person votes, and so you end up with strong men winning with people who, like George Bush, seem like the kind of person you want to have at your barbecue winning the presidency, even though they are manifestly moronic in their take on things, and they have no sort of administrative track record. I mean,
but Donald Trump has a track record,
and
a majority of the American people reject that track record, and the Republican Party is smart enough to see. Just take a look at the 2022 election, where Trump intervened and endorsed. Overwhelmingly, the candidates lost. If the Republicans want to maintain their majorities in the House, gain a majority in the Senate, and capture the presidency, Donald Trump, at least based on the polling and the statistics, simply doesn't carry it. And let me tell you, there's one thing about a cult. It's narrow, Mark. It's not broad. And if you're going to win the presidency of the United States on a state-by-state race, which is how we run our campaigns, Donald Trump has a serious handicap. Question is what the Democrats will do, and that's a big question. Although Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will in all likelihood be renominated, we don't know that until the convention takes place. That is to say, we don't know what the health of Joe Biden will be. We don't know what the circumstances might be in terms of a whole series of issues. But right now, if the election were held, I believe the Democrats would win. And I think the demonstration of that is the 2022 midterms.
Yes. Well, if the election were held now, you would freeze things now and you'd put Biden in top of ticket and Trump in top of ticket. And you're right, Biden would likely prevail, despite the fact that many polls show that Biden's not popular and that Trump's not popular in the race for unpopularness. Depending on your poll, Trump wins or Biden wins. But I would agree with you for the reasons that we stipulated. That is the way the elections are laid out in this
country.
Can
I throw one more thing out to you? It did not get a lot of press, but there is something called the unity move. That is to say, there are people who want a third party, and they're talking about Joe Manchin for president, and we don't know who for vice president. I don't think a third party can win an election, but a third party, as was the case in 2000 with Nader, can be a spoiler. And remember that if Nader had not been in the contest in Florida, there's no doubt in my mind that Gore would have carried Florida overwhelmingly and would have been president. I am not in favor of a third party. And let me be clear, I voted for a third party candidate, John Anderson.
I thought John Anderson would be your guy. Yeah.
But I have to tell you, I knew at the time that it would not make a difference. But if you have a 50-state campaign with a Joe Manchin or some other national unity candidate, a Democrat and a Republican on the same ticket, garnering enough votes, well, I have to tell you, I think that would work in the Republican advantage, not the Democrats. So that's something I very much oppose. I would like to see a straight two-party battle for the presidency in 2024.
Well, you can tell everyone in a country such as America, we aren't set up for a third-party challenge in the sense that not only will you likely not get enough of the electorate to win the election, but you, in some cases, can't even get on the ballot in some states. Isn't that right, John?
Yes, but I want to remind you, we had a third-party candidate for president who won, and that was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. The Democratic Party was divided into four parts into that campaign. There were three other contenders: John C. Breckinridge, Bell, who was the Speaker of the House, and Stephen A. Douglas. And so Lincoln got in, but on a squeaker because of the Electoral College and because he won a majority of the popular votes. You're not going to see that happen again. It did not happen with George Wallace in 1968. It certainly did not happen with Ross Perot in 2 elections. But what worries me is if you damage the two-party approach, it leaves an opening for somebody to win who you really don't want to win. And that is what happened in 2000 with George Bush.
In other words, and this is a really important point I think that you're making, Brother Rothman, and that is that it's not that the third party only serves to take away enough votes from the guy, generically, man or woman, that you want to win, such that the person that you don't want to win, is your point, actually passes the finish line, and that's what happened with George Bush.
That's right.
I want to ask you, you touched on, so I've got just 2 more things, and I'm so grateful for your time. South Carolina, you mentioned it. You really see the brutality of the GOP in this new South Carolina bill, which is a fetal heartbeat type bill, which is generally around 6 weeks. So any abortion after 6 weeks is illegal in the state of South Carolina with this new bill. Can you speak to that and sort of this state-by-state course that a lot of these GOP legislators are following?
It's appalling. And let me be clear. If, in fact, in 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, we had state-by-state decision on whether to integrate, the South would have remained segregated. The only reason that Brown versus the Board of Education had impact is it had a national impact. Same thing applied with Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court decision essentially goes back to a proposition stated by Stephen A. Douglas in 1858 when he ran against Abraham Lincoln for the Senate, and that is popular sovereignty, that each state should resolve for itself its own position. That is not the way you have a united union. Remember what Abraham Lincoln said: a house divided against itself cannot stand. We are a nation divided against ourselves on the question of choice. Please note, I did not say abortion. I said choice, a woman's right to control her own body. And I made this point the other day very clearly. If anybody told me what I could or could not do with my body, I would tell them to take a flying leap. And I think that's what the women of America are doing. And the Republicans understand that to a degree, but not enough. And so what happened in South Carolina, in my judgment, is an abomination. And frankly, reveals the weakness which the Supreme Court has underlined in the question of popular sovereignty. And I rejected that notion today, and I would have rejected it in 1858. And certainly if Abraham Lincoln were alive today, he would not be a Republican, because he would not accept the idea of state-by-state decisions. Can you imagine? Oh, and let me just make a comment about what Spencer Christian said, which to me is very important. And by the way, an excellent interview. I don't know how many people have been to Birmingham, Alabama. I've been to Birmingham, and I went to the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham. And in Birmingham, you learn about what Jim Crow meant by walking through that museum. The idea that in California, in Southern California, from the sound of music, all references to the Nazis or Nazi symbolism would be omitted is criminal. It is the same kind of situation that Ron DeSantis is imposing in Florida, and which the Republicans, I dare say, would like to impose in too many states. May I say a quick word about the transgender business, which on Fox is one of the biggest stories that ever hit. All I can tell you is every American should have the right to live their life as they see fit, as long as it doesn't impose on anybody else. And again, the Republicans have set up a straw man, this transgender nonsense, which frankly is offensive in every single way. I don't care if you're gay or straight or transgender, you have a right to live your life. So if I may just conclude this diatribe by saying, I would commend everyone. Not only should you visit the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham, you should also visit the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington and the Museum in Washington for Black History, which I assume, Mark, when you were visiting your parents, you may have had time to stop in and see.
I've seen it. Yeah, it's powerful.
If we forget our history, if we allow people to censor our history, we make a huge mistake. And let me be crystal clear. I would never vote for Ron DeSantis because I disagree with him on too many issues. But anyone who favors the kind of censorship and, yes, book removal from library shelves that Ron DeSantis favors has no business in the White House.
This is interesting to kind of pull you into a controversy. Let me handle one controversy first, and then I'll get to this if there's time.
Sure.
On the transgender question, you saw that story about, where was it? Albert, will you check the, maybe you know, John, there's a graduation where they won't allow a transgender student who has been living all these high school years for the 4 years of high school.
I read the story.
Yeah. What were you?
Google it.
I mean, yes. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what school or what state. But to me, it is reflective of some of what you're talking about, which is there's a real person here. This isn't some philosophical, theoretical thing. This is someone who's going through this difficult period of adolescence and through high school, graduating, and now it's this I don't know what you'd call it. It's there it is. Okay. Gulfport, trans girl misses graduation, wouldn't allow her to go to graduation unless she dressed as a boy.
Just terrible. And the same thing applies in Oklahoma. Maybe you can pull up that story too, where a Native American has been told they cannot wear a sacred feather as part of their graduation attire. This is absurd, and it carries political correctness, which is completely incorrect.
Well, also, I think it's just played for political currency. Sort of. That's why what you were suggesting. That's why I thought of it. And now I want to ask you about Oprah. Apparently, Governor Newsom is assessing who to appoint should Dianne Feinstein step down. And one of the names that Newsom is considering is media mogul Oprah Winfrey. And
who is having that conversation?
Well, they are having it at the State House. Appointing a celebrity, it's thought, John, could help Newsom avoid picking favorites among actual politicians. Oprah has tremendous likability. She is insanely smart. She likely reflects politically many of the same leanings that Newsom has and that Californians have. And so I ask you, Uh, might it happen should the 89-year-old Feinstein push away?
Of course it could. And it would make perfect sense for Gavin Newsom. He promised to appoint an African-American woman. We know that Oprah Winfrey would only serve the balance of Diane's term. We know politically she's consistent with Gavin Newsom's point of view and Diane's point of view. So it would make perfect sense. It avoids the political turmoil of making a selection of someone who would necessarily then want to stand for election in her own right, like Barbara Lee. And I use that because she is a candidate. But Gavin Newsom has boxed himself in. Would Oprah take the job? That's a very good question. But is it a viable possibility? I always remember, do you remember Murder, She Wrote with Angela Lansbury? Okay. If you remember, it was an absurd plot, but there was a vacancy in the House of Representatives in Maine, where she theoretically lives, and she is appointed to that seat. So they had a whole series of things as Angela Lansbury as a congresswoman. Now, the fault with the plot is governors don't appoint members of the House, only members of the Senate. So the whole premise was wrong, but it was the same logic. So I would not rule it out. And I think if she were willing and Gavin Newsom wanted to take himself off the political hot plate, that'd be a heck of a way to do it. By the way, I've had several people suggest that he appoint me. I'm afraid I don't qualify because I'm not African American and I'm not a woman. But
do you think it's a smart thing that we do? Politicians do this. Biden did it when he talked about his running mate. I'm going to find an African American woman to be the next fill in the blank. Do you think that's a good thing?
I have to tell you, I've always understood ticket balancing. But I think when you choose a vice president or you choose a member of the Senate, you want to make sure the person you are selecting is someone who can do the job. Now, Gavin Newsom did not suggest Oprah Winfrey, at least publicly. There may be private trial balloons. That doesn't surprise me at all. But the important thing for California is that we have a senator who reflects our point of view. And if you want to have a non-political nominee, the governor appoints that person. They serve the balance of the term. Well, that's the governor's option.
But this thing that my point is this. I hate it. I hate the suggestion that that I'm going to pick a person, and you mentioned their race specifically, and you mentioned their gender specifically. I just see this as you can tell me, though, the political calculus must be clear. It seems to me like a political loser. Like, why do you do that kind of thing? That seems like a virtue signaling that is just so transparent. But maybe politically the calculus is positive.
It's the same reason that Walter Mondale took Geraldine Ferraro. He needed a woman on the ticket.
No, he took her, but he didn't announce it ahead of time.
He indicated he wanted a woman. He did indicate it. I was in a meeting with him where he indicated that. And Dianne Feinstein, by the way, was at the top of the list. We thought she was going to be the nominee. She was only disqualified because of her husband, Dick Blum, and his extensive financial dealings. What Mondale did not take into account was Geraldine Ferraro's husband, who also had deep financial implications, if you all remember history. But I think when we talk about ticket balancing, it used to be if you lived at one end of the nation, you took somebody from the other end of the nation. Dewey in 1948 with Earl Warren. But the exception to that was, of course, when Bill Clinton took Al Gore. They were from neighboring states, Arkansas and Tennessee. But Ronald Reagan, in the end, settled on George Bush. Ronald Reagan from California, George Bush from both Connecticut and Texas. Although
that's a ticket balancing of a different sort. I'm talking about virtue signaling, and I'm sick of it. And the one thing the Democrats should do is get off it. I'm looking for an African-American woman. Hey, dude, why don't you just not announce it and just, as you suggest, balance the ticket or make the choice that you want to make?
Let me explain. Joe Biden was in a serious question of winning the nomination. He needed to win the South Carolina primary.
So that was the political calculus.
Okay. Absolutely, and he won the nomination. And
great. That's different. That explains it. At least you put it in a context. Thank you. Good. And let's not forget the Kamala Harris finger puppet, which still has residence here. John, you gave me my first radio interview in San Francisco.
It's true.
It's so good to see you again.
Thank you.
John, you are a resource that we will continue to exploit. Love your visits on Wednesdays.
May I say I'm delighted to be exploited, and I want to thank you, Mark and Kim, for your indulgence. And, of course, our wonderful producer who I've missed the last few weeks. And may I say I'm delighted that he's back.
Yes, Albert is back from Asia.
Albert, thank you.
Yeah, and Kim is
how are you?
always lovely. So thank you, John. We'll see you next week. John Rothmann, everybody. Yeah. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.